fish to bring it back in here, and those are very dangerous jobs. We need to provide enhanced security for them in order to ensure that they bring in the catch that they catch. So, Mr. Speaker, so I've heard from my Quebec colleagues earlier on, we've heard, they've seen this in papers, where sometimes fishing vessels are out in the East Coast, in rough waters, and they need some help. They pick up the phone, and the phone rings somewhere in Italy. Mr. Speaker, I'm from the West Coast. Even I understand that, Maritimes, whether it's Newfoundlanders, sometimes I don't even understand their accent. But again, Mr. Speaker, you need local people. You need local people. I have colleagues from Newfoundland, and they have a distinct culture over there. And then you need to ensure that, we don't send these distress calls overseas where you're not going to be able to understand the language. And on the east, on West Coast, and we've seen cuts to, the Kitsilano Coast Guards. And then my colleague earlier on from Burnaby, New West Coquitlam, pointed out that two of the hovercrafts are out of commission now. So, Mr. Speaker, on one hand, you're making the very cuts that are required to support our fishing industry. On the other hand, you're not providing protection for these fish to come into our rivers to ensure that we have a sustainable fisheries over a long period of time. And yet, this is a good step ensuring to make sure that the fishing that is unreported illegal and unreported illegal and also unregulated fishing is being protected. So, Mr. Speaker, I think I've got a few minutes left, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the government to work with other nations to bring them on board to ensure that we provide a leadership role, which this government has actually not provided in other areas. We've seen this in not only last year when we lost the UN Security Council, but other areas where we failed to provide that leadership. Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House, there are a number of issues with this bill that have been pointed out already, and we would hope that this government will listen to some of the amendments that we will offer to ensure that we have a bill that has teeth, that is proper, that will protect our fishermen, that will protect our communities, that will protect jobs in this country. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, I know I'm hoping that the amendments would be entertained in the committee stage. The record of this government is that, over the last number of years, we've seen many amendments to enhance various bills, and sometimes they rush bills through, and there are even typos in there. Not only that, we've seen a number of bills that were told in the committee stage that they were unconstitutional, and yet this government, and we've seen the crime bill, we've seen a few other bills that have been ruled unconstitutional, and we actually pointed that out in the committee stage, yet the Conservatives failed to take that into account. And not only failed to take that into account, Mr. Speaker, they refused to entertain some of the recommendations that the opposition parties had. Those recommendations were based on facts, science, based on legitimate concerns from the community, the stakeholders. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not even going to get into facts and figures because that's something Conservatives don't believe in. They don't believe in science. They don't believe in concrete numbers. So I'm going to leave that for now for another day, Mr. Speaker. So I'm going to sum this up, Mr. Speaker. Good step. Hopefully we'll get some amendments in the committee stage to enhance this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Dauphin Swan River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I listened to the last two speeches, it's clear that it's time to set the record straight Member for Cardigan talked about Experimental Lakes area. It is now being run by the International Institute for Sustainable Development and will continue to provide world-class science. I would make the point that $18 million is being spent to rehabilitate Lake Winnipeg, real on-the-ground environmental work. And that's what this government believes in, on-the-ground environmental work. The other side, when they criticize our environmental record, all they talk about is process. This government is actually doing things to rehabilitate and remediate the environment. I would also note, Mr. Speaker, that in 2010, under this government's watch, there was a record Pacific salmon run. In 2014, again under this government's watch, another record Pacific salmon run. Notice how they never talk about the actual fish, what's going on in the environment. I should also make the point, the member for Cardigan complains about the low price of lobster. Why is the price of lobster low? Because lobsters are extremely abundant. And my friend across the way, he talked about habitat enhancement, completely neglecting to mention that this government put $25 million into the Recreational Fisheries Conservation Partnership Program, funding 400 habitat enhancement projects across the country. My question to him is he against local angling and fisheries conservation groups doing on-the-ground conservation projects?
The honourable member for Surrey North.
Wow. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what their record is on the environment. This is not hidden. 99% of the lakes, 99% of the rivers have been taken out of environment protection. That's their record, Mr. Speaker. And somehow, Mr. Speaker, the run of the 2010 or the run in the Fraser River of this year, we've had good runs in those 2 years. Is it because of the Conservatives? I can assure you the fish weren't listening to the Conservatives' calls to come into the Fraser River, Mr. Speaker. What we need is sustainable, long-term planning, management of fisheries. This government has failed. They have cut funds. They have cut funds to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. They have failed. Cohen report, before the last election, they announced the Cohen Commission to study where the missing fish went in British Columbia, Mr. Speaker, and yet none of the recommendations from that commission have been implemented, but this government has been sitting on their table for over 2 years, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Westminster, Coquitlam and Westminster.
Westminster Coquitlam. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member, my colleague from Surrey North, spoke very well, I think, about the importance of investing in our fishery, about investing in the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, about investing in enforcement and science and habitat. And Mr. Speaker, I'm just wondering if my honourable colleague can comment about whether this government is adequately investing in those areas, investing in our fishery, to do the kind. I mean, we all agree that the legislation that's proposed here in front of us, while there may be some amendments necessary, is a step in the right direction. But the kind of investment that's needed, that this government should be providing to our fishery across the country, and I would argue, since I'm from the West Coast and he is as well, is completely inadequate. I wonder if the my honourable colleague can comment on that.
The honourable member for Surrey North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wonderful question. Mr. Speaker, somehow the Conservatives think that this fishing business is only 1 year, we take 1 year at a time. Well, let me tell them, let me remind them, fishing is a long-term, we need a long-term strategy in order to ensure not only we have fish this year, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we need to have a sustainable management of fisheries. And this government, this bill is a good step to work with other countries to ensure, because fish, they cross boundaries, rivers, they cross international boundaries. We need to ensure to work with other countries to ensure bills like this are implemented. But you need to provide resources for that, Mr. Speaker. And we've heard in this House that they made cuts to the very surveillance that's required to ensure that illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing does not occur, because it hurts our economy, it hurts our family when those resources are being depleted by this unregulated, unreported, illegal fishing, Mr. Speaker. So under this government, we've seen cut after cut to fisheries, to environment, whether it's on the habitat side, whether it's enhancing our fishing stock, and they haven't even implemented a number of reports that they commission in order to make sure that we have a long-term sustainable fisheries, not just yearly investments that they pretend that they're making, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Honourable Member for Sanders Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To return to the actual Bill C-3 and the implementation of international measures to stop the importation of illegal and unregulated fishery products, I wonder if the Honourable Member for Surrey North would agree with me that in prohibited imports under 5.6, where it says no person shall import any fish or marine plant knowing to have been taken, harvested, possessed, transported, or distributed contrary to, and then it lists a number of laws. We heard earlier from the Parliamentary Secretary that the definition of fish will be changed to ensure that it includes processed fish as opposed to fish that have just been caught in the nets. I'm wondering, and I hope it will work, to use this law to stop what is a massive injustice, which is the use of slave labor, literally slaves, on the fishing fleets of Thailand. Far offshore, they catch the majority of fish meal that goes into an equally environmentally and horrific practice of shrimp aquaculture throughout Thailand. This is one of the most ecologically devastating practices, starting with clear-cutting mangrove forests. If we could do something to protect the mangrove forest while at the same time ending a practice of slavery on the high seas, I think this is a legitimate application of this treaty. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Surrey North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would agree with the member in regards to the definition of the fish that's being proposed by the Conservatives, and I'm hoping that we can look at that in detail at the committee stage. I know I've talked about this before. Conservatives usually don't entertain some good, legitimate concern. Justification for this bill is actually there. It has taste to implement it, and I'm hoping that Conservatives will entertain some of those concerns. And absolutely, we should always be concerned about labor practices, not only here in Canada, but around the world. We should be cooperating with other countries to ensure that not only labor practices, but environmental practices are in line to ensure that we have long-term sustainable fisheries, not only for Canada, but around the world. As I said before, Mr. Speaker, fish don't see borders. They don't see one ocean or the other. They swim all across the world. So we need to ensure, work with other countries, work with our partners. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I'm quite doubtful whether under this government, under Conservatives, we can do that. I can assure you the leader from the opposition work with countries around the world to ensure that we have long-term sustainable practices in place to ensure long, prosperous economy for Canadians.
Questions?